This technique, which I like to call vintage wallpaper or shabby chic wallpaper, is really simple, and basically it's a whole bunch of stripes on a page, but it makes a really effective background which I think looks really cute. So all you need for this technique is a fairly open stamp. This one is from Hero Arts and it's the single hydrangea. You also need 4 colours of Adirondack dabbers, and I've chosen to use willow, cranberry, shell pink and gold. The only other things that you need for this technique is some scrap paper with a straight edge and a piece of white cardstock. The first step is to grab the palest of the Adirondack dabbers, and this one's the shell pink. And all you need to do is lay down this colour over the base of the card. Now, it doesn't really matter if you dab or if you use a streaking motion. It's just to get the colour on to the card. Now, you can see that I'm only doing this on the top 3/4 of the card. You'll see the reason for this later. Now, as the name Shabby Chic implies, you don't really want this to be perfect. You're after something that's going to look worn and aged, pretty much like wallpaper that's kind of been on the house for a little bit too long. So leaving this a little bit streaky and patchy is really what you're after. Next, I'm going to use the willow dabber. What you're trying to do is create something that looks vaguely like a weathered stripe. You don't want it to be neat, you don't want it to have a straight edge. Do try and make them similar sizes, because again, you're looking for something that looks like it was once nice wallpaper. Before I start with this next section and dry this off a little, it doesn't really need much. For the next step, you just need to lay this piece of scrap paper so that it's roughly parallel to the edge of your piece of cardstock. Then taking the darkest colour, which in this case is the cranberry, and you need to make sure this is quite wet and juicy, otherwise it's a bit of a nuisance. And what you're wanting to do is just run the very, very tip of the cranberry along this line, just to create a tiny line of colour. You're not trying to apply very much of this, just the tiniest amount, so be careful. Once you think you've got what you're after, move the paper. That's really all you want, this tiny fine line here, just to look like it's been worn off a bit. This just helps give the whole piece a little bit of definition just by having that line. Now, you may or may not want to use a separate piece of scrap paper each time, just so that you don't get this dirty or muddied. That's what I'm going to do. Again, keeping it relatively parallel. You can be more precise and use a ruler to measure, but I'm not really going to worry because this is supposed to look sort of shabby and a little bit not quite perfect. Now, this is the reason that I've left this bottom bit white here. All I'm going to do, lay a piece of that scrap paper down, and then with this dark cranberry colour, I'm going to cover the entire bottom section of this piece. Just dabbing like this gives a really velvety look to the finished product. Also, don't do too thick a coating, otherwise you won't get any of that variation and it will just look a little bit too perfect. So just removing that scrap paper again, you can start to see how the finished piece is going to look here. I'm just going to dry this off a little. to finish off this shabby chic wallpaper background, I'm going to use the Hero Arts stamp and apply the gold dabber directly to the stamp. Just making sure it's nice and juicy first. Again, this is supposed to be wallpaper, so some of the pattern will be off the edge. And as this is supposed to be vintage wallpaper, I'm really not concerned if the images aren't perfect. It's really important that you wash your stamps straight away. So the final step is just to let this dry and then embellish. And I'll show you what this looks like. This is a book page I've made using that same technique and the same colours. You've got the shell pink in the background here as the base colour. Then I've gone over with the willow, accented with the cranberry, both down the bottom here and in these little stripes, and then stamped the hydrangea using the Adirondack gold dabber just in patterns along here. Now all I've done to finish this page is mount the background onto some green pearl card. I haven't finished the edges at all, I've just left them raw just so that it looks a little bit more interesting. Giving you a close-up look here. This is the gold stamped hydrangea. The central image is coloured with a combination of Prismacolor pencils, and then the background I have done with alcohol inks. Now these stayed wet a little longer than I was expecting, so I went and covered the piece of vellum with this lovely panel of mica which I'd cut to size. I've added just this simple rub-on down here with two different colours. The vintage word with the mica over the top. So there you have it. The shabby chic wallpaper background technique. Really simple, but I think creates a really lovely looking page.